They let him stop off in his room to get a change of clothing. He managed to slip the rag out of his pocket and force it and the pink substance into an empty water bottle. He secured it in his drawer and then let the men lead him out. He stripped his clothes off and showered. When he stepped out, he saw that his clothes was gone. When he asked the guards about it, they didn't answer. He got dressed as the guards passively watched. When he was done, they opened the door and gestured him out. "Where are we going?" he asked. "Debriefing," one said. A few minutes later, he was on the command deck. As soon as he entered, the other people in the room started to clear out in the inn. Only he and Markov were left. "All right," said Markov. "Let's hear it. Tell me everything." He told him almost everything. He mentioned the strange fish, knowing that Markov would see the video recording anyway. He told him about the pink swathes, but didn't mention the sample he had retrieved. He told him about the problems with the MROVs, that they either weren't receiving their commands or had failed in some other way. He described the progress that had been made. Markov just nodded. "What happened with Hendrik?" he asked. "How's he doing?" Markov shrugged. "Delirious," he said. "They're shooting him full of something to calm him down. He keeps talking about his father. He was doing that down there." Altman said he thought he saw his father outside the base keep. He wanted to let him in. He gave a weary smile. "I quit. Understandably was opposed to this. I thought Stevens gave him a clean bill of health," said Markov. He did," said Altman. "No reason to think otherwise. I thought he was okay most of the way down. He was a friend. I'm sorry this happened to him. He was unstable." "No," said Altman. "I think there's more to it than that." He told Markov the whole story, only glossing over the end, suggesting that it was Hendricks himself who had wriggled free of his bond. "We did a diachronic tracking of the pulse signal," Altman said. "The strange thing is that it seemed to correspond to Hendricks' mental decay. When the signal was stronger, he started seeing things, becoming paranoid and violent. When it was weaker, he seemed to be like he normally is. I think the signal changed him." Markov looked at him a long time. "That doesn't seem possible," he finally said. "I know it doesn't," said Altman, "but it's correlated perfectly. I think the pulse signal does something to the human brain." "Why didn't it do the same thing to you?" "Who knows," said Altman. "Maybe I can resist it for some reason, or maybe it's doing things that I haven't managed to notice yet." "What do you think it is?" Markov asked again, just as he asked weeks before in Altman's kitchen. "I don't know," said Altman. "I haven't even seen it yet, but I can tell you one thing, it scares the living shit out of me." They were both silent for a while, lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Markov looked up. "You'll have to go down again," he said. "Now, soon. We need to add some equipment to the council so that you can communicate with the MROVs." "Funny," said Altman. "What's funny?" "I was going to suggest doing that," he said, "adding something to the council." Markov gave him a quizzical look. "You did suggest it," he said. "That was one of the first things you said to us. Don't you remember? Are you all right?" "I must have been more rattled than I realized," Altman thought. He thought about how to answer Markov rapidly, decided the best strategy was to ignore it. As long as it's not with Hendricks, I'm willing. I don't mind going down alone. Not alone, said Markov. I want you to take a few trips down. We'll try a different person each time. How do I know they're not going to react like Hendrick did? I was lucky with him. I may not be lucky next time. You've become more important than I expected you to be, Markov said. You know how to run the base skiff and take the proper measurements, which means I'm counting on you. I need you to do this. And in exchange, Markov gave him a level stare. No, and in exchange you'll do it. Is that a threat? Altman asked. When I'm threatening you, you'll know. Altman closed his eyes. If it wasn't a threat, it wasn't far from one. But he knew he didn't really have a choice. All right, he said, but I want a tranquilizer gun just in case. And I want whoever goes down with me to be strapped to his chair. Agreed, said Markov. He stood and made a show of shaking Altman's hand. Thank you for your cooperation. I'll be in touch. Chapter 39. Hendrick woke up in a strange place, some sort of medical facility. The last thing he could remember was being on a base skiff. He and Altman were going down, and then his head had started to hurt so much he could hardly stand it. After that, it all felt like a dream. There had been some kind of problem. He remembered Altman speaking calmly to him, remembered taking readings, but also remembered the feel of the floor. He must have fallen. Maybe they hit something. He felt groggy. Parts of his body were numb, and parts of his brain felt like they had been torn out. There was a tube running into his forearm. Maybe they were experimenting on him. He looked around. He was the only one there. He moved furtively out of bed, peeling the tape off the tube in his arm and pulling it out. It burned coming out. He dropped it, left it dripping beside the bed, and stumbled to the door. It was locked. He stayed there staring at the handle. After a while he heard the sound of footsteps in the hall outside. He rushed back into the bed and half closed his eyes. Through his eyelashes he watched the door open. A woman came in dressed in white, carrying a hollow board. She walked straight to his bed. His mind pictured him running out the door at the far end of the room, but in the end his body did not move. Hello, said the woman. How are we today? He didn't say anything, still pretending to be asleep. Oh dear, you've torn your IV out again, she said. We can't have that, can we? She bent down for the end of the tube. It was at that moment that his body decided to reach up and grab her wrist. True, he was in his body, was watching through his eyes, but it was doing things he wasn't telling it to do. He wasn't the one controlling it, which meant there must be someone else in there with him. As soon as he thought that, it felt like everything was happening at a little distance, like he'd sunk deeper into his body, like he'd never be in control of the body again. And yet he could still feel everything. He watched the hand holding the nurse's arm pull her on top of him like she was a doll. He felt the jaw opening and the teeth closing around the nurse's neck, and then a series of wet sounds as the neck burst open and warm blood spilled down across his chin and his own neck. Her wrist, the one he was holding, saw was broken, crushed, and the arm attached to it was no longer sitting in the socket right. She was trying to gasp for breath, but there was a hole in her windpipe now, and all that came out was a hissing and a mist of blood. Her face was there just above him, her eyes terrified for a moment, but almost immediately becoming loose in their orbits as she lost consciousness. A few seconds later, after his body had done a few more things to her, he was certain she was dead. If he'd been asked to describe how exactly it had happened, he wouldn't have been able to say, though. He was fairly certain he had something to do with it, or not him exactly, his body. One moment she was still alive, even if just barely, and then there was an awful blur of things happening. When they stopped, she was dead. He padded softly to the door and tried it. It was still locked. How was that possible? She'd come through it, hadn't she? She must have had a key. He scrambled back to her corpse in search of her pockets, but he couldn't find any pockets. She was too much of a mess. Pushing his bloody hands through the soaking remains of clothing and flesh, he finally found something hard that wasn't a bone. He had just straightened up, bloody key in hand, when he realized that he wasn't alone in the room. After all, there was a shape there in the shadows of the last bed. "Who is it?" he said. "Don't you recognize me?" a voice said. He went a little closer, then closer still. It was as if the person was both there and not there at the same time, and then suddenly he felt a piercing pain in his head. He staggered. When he looked back up, he knew who it was. "Dad," he said. "Good to see you." "Jason," he said, "come sit down. I want to have a serious talk with you." "What about Dad?" But his dad wasn't there where he thought he was. He turned around and found him in another bed. "We're failing, Jason," his dad said. "You should leave that thing down where you found it. Convergence is not the only thing that matters." "Convergence?" asked Hendrik, then had a search frantically for his father, who somehow moved again. They want us all to become one, son." He gave a mournful smile, shaking his head. "Can you imagine?" he said. "Who's they, Dad?" "We have to be very careful, or there will be nothing left of us." Then his dad smiled. It was a beautiful smile, like he used to give Jason back when he was very young, just a few years old. Jason had forgotten that smile, but now it all came flooding back. "Tell them, Jason," he said. "Tell everyone." "I will, Dad," he whispered. "I will." There was some noise behind him, but he didn't want to look away from his father's face. If he did, he feared he'd never find it again. Then there was shouting. He ignored it as long as he could, but it was too powerful. He turned around and moved toward it. There was a roar and a flash, and he was suddenly on the ground, staring straight up at the ceiling. "I should get up and tell them," he thought, but when he tried, he couldn't move. "I'd just lie here," he thought. "Dad," he whispered, but there was no answer.